guys, welcome back to Spank Ranch Garage. Last episode for the JD410, we put together this Wain Roy clamshell bucket type deal. Now we need to add the auxiliary hydraulics to the machine to operate the bucket. So I think that's going to be a fairly straightforward task, but it's still a lot of work, so let's get started on it. All right, so this particular video is on a JD410 backhoe, but really this applies to any closed center hydraulic system on any machine. I don't care if it's a paver, a skid steer, excavator, whatever. So we have here on the right, that pedal is for the extend-a-hoe, and that's driven off my left foot. And you can see it's just a bent piece of metal that pivots in the center with a linkage here that runs this valve, up and down. So the heart of this thing is this super regular generic hydraulic valve. It's a hand-operated valve, but we'll be getting rid of this hand-operated control. It's a three-way, so it's got a neutral, flow this way, flow that way. It's got a pump port, tank port, and then your two directional cylinder ports. It also has this plug here, which is very important, and we'll get into why a little later. A 12-inch by 4-inch will do it for us. All right, that'll be a new pedal eventually. Looks reasonable for a pedal, but we'll go compare it to the machine. Couldn't have nailed that any better on the first try. It looks good. Couple quick zaps on here should be good enough. So now we've got a pivot point. Now I just need to make some tabs to hold this thing to the floor. Something like that, weld these to the floor, then this thing can do its thing. Something like that. Factory pedal, spanky pedal. Should work good. I'm not going to weld anything in yet though until we get a valve mounted under the floor here to see where the linkage is gonna land. I got a lot to figure out with that. Hoping that there would be space up under here to mount this valve and tie my pedal into it. And unfortunately, the frame kind of gets in the way of that. But also, it's the first day above freezing, and everything's thawing and dripping, and it's not that nice under there anyway. So now I'm searching for alternate solutions here. I have an idea if this control lever is reversible. If everything's symmetrical here, I got an idea that I think will be pretty slick. And then we should be able to control this thing from the back. So now when I mount it up against that wall, this will extend through into the cabin, and then we can make a linkage to the pedal. That feels right. here's what I ended up with. I had to mount it at a little of an angle, and the relief valve is kind of sticking out here. But the reason being is we have to be able to fit a fitting on here, and I don't have the right fitting, and I need to be able to get a hose on this. So I wanted to play it safe. But now we're pointing that lever towards our pedal, so now we got to figure out that linkage. I didn't have a metric coupling nut, so we welded some together, and that'll hold for now. I can order one next time I'm ordering. That's relatively it. Now we need to run down to the pedal. Neutral would be about there. Ooh, will that have enough angle though? We might be stressing that there. I didn't think about that. We'll just try. All right, so this is just mocked up right now, but I think we're there. So down, up, down, up. I'm getting full throw on the valve. I'm using a good amount of the pedal travel. And it looks to sit pretty level to the other pedal that's in here, so I think that's going to be it. I think I paint this thing up and weld it in. All right, so let's talk more about this valve we're using for our auxiliary, specifically the open center and closed center concept. So this valve, as it stands from the manufacturer, you give it the blow test, it's obvious this is an open center valve, meaning that fluid from the pump will go right to the tank port, pass right through the valve, and as you create demand on that circuit, it will basically chamber some of that oil to whichever output port you're looking for, and the return side and whatever isn't being used will continue on through the valve. So if you had a machine with 3 of these in series, that first valve would get priority, then the second valve, then the third valve. These John Deeres use a closed center hydraulic system, which means that basically you've got pressure to every valve at all times, but that fluid is not actually flowing. It is a closed center valve. So if you think in electrical terms, a closed center system is everything is in parallel, where an open center system, everything is in series. So everything is one big loop. A closed center system, you can add on as many legs as you want. So if we just installed this valve as is, this would rob all of the hydraulic pressure from the machine and nothing would work. All the fluid would just be running through this valve, out the other side, and back to the tank, and we'd be screwed. So it's important to check with the valve manufacturer before you buy it and make sure that the valve is configurable for closed center operation. So they sell this plug for this valve. This will actually block that center port and allow this thing to operate as closed center. We're going to get rid of the open center plug, which should just be a little shorty, right? All it's doing is plugging the hole. There's a bore down in here that needs to be blocked, and that's what this is for. I think this is something that people screw up a lot, especially what I read with the John Deeres when they're installing aftermarket accessories. They're not compatible with a closed center system, and then you've got this huge pressure drop throughout the whole machine, and all the other functions are compromised. So now if we do the blow test, she's tight, no airflow. So that means that fluid will just sit here at the pressure side until there is a command from our control, and then it will feed it to whichever port we're asking it to. The other port will return and blast right through to the tank. All right, so I was able to fit a 90 in here. It just clears. And I ran a hose through and underneath the machine. Now when I replumbed this backhoe, that's gonna be very hard to see, but I'll show you better. If you look right there, there's a cap. I already put a T into the supply and return for the backhoe valves. So we should be able to just tap right into those and we'll have power at this valve. All right, so I moved a couple levers, made sure we got no pressure on the system. Grabbed the wrong wrench 10 times. Get ready to take a bath here. Plug out of this thing so it's ready to go. Okay, so that's one thing you know, to be mindful of if you're working on these machines and you're already in here doing other hoses, might as well set yourself up with another auxiliary port. Well, if you want to add an accessory later, it's just as easy. I don't have to tear the floor pans out of it again, everything else. All right, so similar thing here on the pressure side, pump side, put a 90 in it, and I was able to run that hose straight down pretty clean. So now we got to get under there, get that tied into the supply side. So now we can put our actual circuit fittings in so we can start building our hoses. Something like that. All the valve fittings are O-ring Boss, and all the hoses I'm using are 37-degree flare. Now, another thing, I was smart to buy this on Surplus Center. This is an extended fitting. You'll need this because you wouldn't be able to swing two 90s here. They'd hit each other. So happy I had this one kicking around. It's made exactly for this purpose, I would imagine. Yeah, Surplus Center is a good place to buy hydraulic fittings. They seem to be very well priced, very fast shipping. Got a good selection. All seems to be good quality, so. All right, now these will be our two lines out to our accessory. All right, so now I started her up. We're looking for leaks. Because remember, this thing's under 2,500 pounds of pressure immediately. So I want to just squirt some into a bucket, make sure we're flowing correctly here. That is some nasty fluid in this machine. That's going to have to get flushed a few times. But anyway, fundamentally the valve works. So what I was showing there was that little drip that we get when this thing's running. I think that's to be expected. So there's no actual seals in a valve between the ports. Like there's no O-rings or rubber seals. They're just working on a tight tolerance machined spool. So I think on a closed center, they're always going to pass just a smidge. Now in reality, it doesn't matter because you're passing to both sides of the cylinder, so nothing moves, everything's good. I don't know, maybe a brand new John Deere valve wouldn't pass for a couple of years, but this is an $80 China valve, so it is what it is. But I guarantee you that's better than a lot of the valves on this machine. Also concerned about the amount of water in the fluid. I gotta flush that and drain that again. That's annoying because it's $200 in fluid each time and it probably needs 2 full fluid flushes, so great. So now we need to come up with how we're gonna route these lines out the stick to the bucket. And I'm thinking I want to replicate kind of what they did with this factory manifold here, because the manifold swings with it and then all the lines go down to the hinge down here and then back up. If you were to just shoot a line straight out of here and up, when you're digging a deep hole, you're going to be ripping it, pulling it, whatever. We need to be careful with our line routing. All right, so I got these like 18-inch hoses here. I'd like these to reach over to this block here. Well, swung all the way to the left, and it looks like they'll reach. They'll be way looser straight and to the right. And I'm thinking maybe weld like a line clamp on top with the bulkhead fitting to shoot these straight through. Maybe, I don't know. I got to do some playing around here. So the idea here would be to weld this bracket on, and then I can slide bulkhead fittings through, clamp these girls down, and that should be a nice transition point between the hose coming off the valve here and then give me the ability to run another hose down like the factory ones. makes or breaks projects like this is the robustness and the smartness of routing the hoses. That's like the part that intimidates me the most, because this hoe moves in so many ways and there's so many joints, it's got to be right. And we can kind of follow John Deere's example here with this middle manifold. I think they did a pretty good job with that. So we'll see what we can make happen. While I had the welder out, I finished up the new pedal, so that works great. That would be squeeze my bucket, open my bucket, vice versa, depending on personal preference. So I think that'll work really good. Gonna rehydrate while the paint dries, and I'll see you in 20 minutes. All right, let's see how these lines bend compared to the other ones. So when you look at the bottom pivot point down here, all the way up to the top of this boom, I mean, the distance between the cab and this changes by like 5 feet just digging a hole. So you're never gonna run a hose straight up like that. So I think what Deere did of going down to the hinge and then coming back up is the best bet. And I think we got some hose we can get started with that on. Comes off of our stuff down and then back up, and it could tie into a hard line maybe up here. I'm hesitant to like drill through the boom because it would be easier to just scoot out the side here and up, but I think that's a bad idea. So something like this, I got some thinking to do. So here's what I'm coming up with here. Run down the boom into a double clamp and then 45 into our hoses, and these hoses will ride nicely next to this cylinder here. No conflicts there. Now when it comes up, it needs to clear all of this, which is going to be a little tight, so we got to test that. I actually had it over here first, and then I realized it was hitting my new manifold block, because half of this block ends up in the boom here. So let's try that. Oh yeah, plenty of room. That's great. That looks really good. So here's what I ended up with here. Got the lines up off to the side of the stick boom here, mounted here, and then we'll probably put another mount up here and then bring them up and out or whatever, because eventually they got to make their way all the way down here too, and this whole part slides. So a lot more thinking to go on here of how to work these hoses to make this not look like a hack job but also be super reliable. You know, even the factory hoses suck from John Deere, in my opinion. Like, this is how they handled the curl cylinder for the Extend-A-Hoe on these old ones. It's just like, you know, super long. Just kind of bothers me because they're so vulnerable hanging around like that. But what else can you do? Because this whole cylinder has got to move 4 feet that way. So we're going to try to do a little better than they did, but that's a tough feat. So far, so good, though. I've been tinkering with this on the last couple nights here. So I got these lines done, painted, mounted. They look good. All the hoses clear, back to our custom manifold. We're pretty good there. Up here, I mocked up some 6-foot hoses, and I'm gonna be holding these hoses together. But I built this custom bracket here. Now this part moves with the Extend-A-Hoe, so I'm kind of going off Case's design here, where they curl the hoses up top, that way they follow down the boom. I already tested, this does have enough travel. But then we got to get down to the bucket. So I got the lines coming down the side here, and they are eventually going to mount down here to the bottom of the boom. And this all moves together, so they'll be all coming out of this main sleeve. It's going to look kind of crazy, but it's going to work. So at this point is where I'm going to cut and flare down here and adapt to the actual hoses that'll go to the bucket. and then we'll put another mount in the middle. It should be pretty well lit for the hard lines. Now the actual bucket is going to be -6, where the rest of the lines are -8. Since we need a fitting here anyway, we'll do our reducing here. That way we could run smaller 3/8 hoses. They should fit a little better because space is getting tight down there for sure. Got a good comment from a viewer of a couple videos back regarding this Zerk. It's very vulnerable sticking out like that. Like when you curl into the ground, you can knock it off. And I didn't even think, but it's easy to just put a 90-degree fitting on it and then roll the cylinder over, and that way you hit it from the bottom and it's totally protected. So thank you for that common sense solution to a simple problem. Sometimes when you stare at things, you just don't think, so it's nice to get other people's perspective sometimes. Just like that. So then flip this thing over. Now I can grease it from the bottom pretty easily. Anyway, these lines are bolted on. Looks like a funny spot, but the bucket we're putting on this, you know, the hoses will run right above here and down to these cylinder ports here for the Wain Roy clamshell bucket. Then in the future, if I ever do swap to a traditional thumb, I have these fittings here I can break and run my flex hoses to the thumb cylinder here. So it's kind of dual purpose. Gotta say, guys, I really like that fit. This is with the boom all the way up, stick all the way in, all the way curled. It's like she's made for it. One of the things I don't like about these older hoses is how bad the ground clearance is, because the bucket doesn't tuck up well. The newer ones have a lot better approach angle, but I mean, we're a little up on the stabilizers, but that's pretty good. That really fit nice. It doesn't look as huge as it does sitting on the ground, but it is still a pretty big bucket. I'm gonna try this sheathing stuff to protect these hoses, but it also holds them together, holds them a little more neat and tidy. Protects them from the sun, and I have a feeling these are gonna take a lot of tree branch damage because of the way they stick up and the woods I'll be working in. So should look nice. I don't know, we'll see if it holds up. It's not very expensive, so it's worth throwing it on, I guess. Well guys, that's all she wrote on this one. We have successfully added a third function to this old John Deere 410 with Extend-A-Hoe. You got your bucket and grapple there. Extend-A-Hoe down there. All your typical backhoe controls here. These lines are pretty clean. I mean, without, you know, the crappy paint work, somebody may wonder if they were factory. I don't necessarily love one thing that's going on here. See how this is flexed? This cylinder does move up and down a little through its stroke, and I am supporting from the bottom of the cylinder because it does travel with the Extend-A-Hoe. Eventually that could fatigue these lines, so it may be in my best interest to move this bracket to the center here because this also slides with it. That way none of that deflects or moves. But for the time being, it's more than sufficient. We'll give her a test, see how she does. I got to check a couple things for leaks. Cylinder looks good so far. If you remember, I had a video about rebuilding this cylinder, doing some sketchy stuff with that. But I'll have to go over everything, make sure everything's tight. And now it's like, should I do the same thing with these stupid lines? Could run a hard line up here, hard line off of that up here, and then run these up and loop them back just like the lines I built. Fix John Deere's sketchy hoses here maybe. Well anyway guys, I'm gonna wrap that one up here. It's starting to snow. It's gonna be another 3 days of just crappy weather. I'm not gonna get anything done outside. So happy to have this sealed up at least before the weather comes in. This will work for pretty much any machine. I mean, the stuff we went over here is not really specific to John Deere. It's not specific to open center or closed center hydraulic systems. Hydraulics are hydraulics. I mean, if you've got flow and pressure, you can tap in and add third, fourth, fifth, sixth, seventh functions to your machine, whatever you want. It does add up. I mean, you got to be smart about your hose routing. You know, I put a lot of thought into how to route all of this so everything moves without pinching. Should be very reliable, just as reliable as the factory stuff. And you got to watch out for this kind of stuff nickel and diming you. I probably have $250, $275 just in fittings to do this job, plus the materials to build the hard lines, plus all the hoses, plus all the hangers, brackets, sleeves, all that stuff. It does add up. But if you're, say, at an auction, you're looking at a machine and it's got auxiliaries in a position you want, whether it be the front or the back of a hoe or an excavator or whatever, and it's done nice and clean this way with properly secured hardline, you know, just be aware that that's quite a task. This took me a lot of nights coming out here tinkering with it, just seeing how to route everything. It takes time. So, you know, if you really wanted auxiliaries and the difference was $1,000 between two machines, I'd buy the one where it's already done. Unless your time's not worth anything, it is a lot of work to do it right. So, as always, let me know what you guys think about this down in the comments. Thanks for watching Spank Ranch Garage. I'll see you next time.